Have you ever wondered why a man can't forget the woman who slipped through his fingers, not with fury, not with chaos, but with a silence that devours his soul? It's not her beauty he remembers. Not entirely. It's not her kindness, though it haunts him like a fragrance once worn against his skin. What sears itself into the male psyche is the experience of not possessing her, of being denied ownership in a world that teaches him to conquer, to name, to dominate. She walked into his life with the quiet poise of a storm long before it touches land. She did not beg to be seen, she commanded attention by not asking for it. Her energy was not loud, but ancient, the kind of woman who has made peace with her shadow and wears it like perfume. She does not fill silence with validation. She does not break tension to soothe egos. She leaves space for him to feel, and this terrifies him. To the man who is still ruled by his projections, still in bondage to his mother wound or lost in the fantasy of the anima, she is unbearable, yet unforgettable. She becomes a mirror, a myth, a mystery, a trigger and a teacher. Because what he desires in her is not her body, not her words, not even her love. It is her essence, the essence of a woman who has made herself sovereign. Men don't talk about it, but their souls ache for the woman they cannot tame. The woman who walks away from drama without slamming a door, who laughs, not because she's performing joy, but because she lives in a frequency where nothing shallow can survive. The woman who doesn't cling, because she has faced loneliness like a warrior stares into fire, and emerged softer, not weaker. She has done the work. Her wounds no longer bleed on others. She does not punish men with her pain, but she also won't let them sleepwalk through their own. Carl Jung spoke of projection, how we do not see others, but only the contents of our own unconscious laid upon them, and in her, he sees the projection begin to crack. The pedestal, unstable, the illusion, burning. She is not the fantasy. She is not his mother. She is not his savior. And that realization does not repel him. It binds him, because deep in the masculine soul is a craving, not for the woman he can own, but for the one who awakens him. And yet, that awakening is costly, because desire without control turns into obsession, and obsession without access becomes worship. He dreams of her not in lust, but in longing, the kind of longing that reshapes a man's life. She becomes the scent of something sacred, something lost. And though he may chase others, bed others, even marry another, the space she carved in his unconscious never closes, because she touched not his ego, but his soul. And you, the woman listening, may have been her, or are becoming her, the one who no longer texts back out of fear, the one who doesn't need to punish him with words because her absence says everything. You have begun the alchemy of transforming attention into power, wounds into wisdom, loneliness into liberty, and whether he sees it or not, he feels it, because energy is louder than words, and mystery is more seductive than exposure. She is the woman who knows that if she must beg for love, it is not love, that if she must explain her worth, it has already been denied. So she doesn't, she simply withdraws, not to manipulate, but to protect her field, to guard the temple of her spirit from those who only worship what they think they can possess. And in that quiet withdrawal, he spirals, he asks himself questions he never asked before, not about her, about himself. What did she see in him before he saw it in himself? Why did she not fight for him? Why does her silence feel louder than every woman who ever screamed? The answer is both cruel and kind, because she does not need him to choose her. She chooses herself, and nothing terrifies a man more than a woman who doesn't need to be chosen. He remembers her not through memory, but through moments that flash across the soul when he least expects them. In the middle of a conversation, when a phrase echoes with her cadence, in the arms of another, when the touch lacks the weight of her absence. She left no trace, yet everything is stained with her essence, like smoke from a fire that never quite burned out. Because the woman he could not own did not leave a wound, she left a space. That space is where the real desire lives, not in her body, but in the power of her absence, not in her availability, but in the impossibility of caging her. She is an echo of the anima, not the soft, sweet ideal, but the dark feminine, Lilith, the storm goddess, the silent priestess. She doesn't perform emotions, she embodies them, and in doing so, she awakens his unconscious longing, not for her alone, but for himself, for the parts of his masculinity he has abandoned, repressed, or disowned. You see, when a man cannot own a woman, he is forced to meet the parts of himself that seek ownership. The ego recoils, the shadow stirs, his need to control, to label, to understand, becomes useless in the face of her depth. And so, she becomes a lesson, the kind that does not teach through words, but through loss. Men are conditioned to conquer, to win, but a man cannot win a woman who plays no game, who disappears not out of insecurity but out of self-respect, who does not dramatize, retaliate, or seek revenge. She simply ceases to be available, and that absence becomes his crucible. He begins to question, did I know her, or did I only know how she made me feel? Did I want her, or did I want the power of being the one she wanted? That is the torment. The woman he could not own reveals to him the places where his self-worth was rooted not in connection, but in possession, where love was mistaken for control, and desire for domination. She becomes the archetypal force that breaks his internal contracts, the silent disruptor of his illusions. And yet, strangely, he does not hate her. He cannot, because there is something in the feminine that is eternal, untouchable. She reminds him of something holy, not religious, sacred, the kind of sacred that demands reverence, not access, and this reverence becomes longing. He romanticizes her not because of what they had, but because of what they never could. She was not the one who got away. She was the one who never belonged. Not to him, not to anyone. She is claimed only by herself. And this is why her energy lingers in his psyche longer than any lover he ever possessed. To the woman listening, know this: when you withhold not your heart, but your dependency, when you offer intimacy, not addiction, when you love without needing to be needed, he feels it. Even if he walks away, even if he calls you cold, even if he replaces you with noise, distraction, or another woman whose validation he can devour like sugar, he remembers you. Because you did not feed his hunger. You held up a mirror to it. And mirrors are painful things. Carl Jung said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed, but not every man is ready to be transformed. Some would rather retreat into the arms of the familiar than confront the unknown woman who awakens his shadow. But even in retreat, the mark remains, because once a man has seen the divine feminine in her full sovereignty, the illusion of lesser love becomes unbearable. She will not always be thanked. She will not always be understood. But she will always be remembered. Because she is not just a woman. She is a mirror, a threshold, a storm in stillness. And what a man desires most, even if he doesn't yet know it, is the woman he cannot tame. There comes a moment, quiet, unannounced, when the man sits alone, staring into the hollowness of another conquest, and realizes, he never really touched her. Not truly. He may have held her body, maybe even whispered into the arc of her neck, but he never reached her soul. That part of her was never his. And that's what drives him mad, not the loss of her presence, but the knowledge that he never had her in the first place. Because she belonged only to herself. To Jung, this is where the anima begins to revolt, the feminine aspect of the man's unconscious no longer appearing in soft dreams or fantasies, but in the haunting image of her. Not the ideal, but the real, the feminine force that refuses to be consumed. She is not the girl who giggles for attention. She is the woman who watches in silence, who listens not to respond, but to feel. Her stillness is not absence. It is power, and he doesn't know how to name it. He tries. He calls her cold, distant, guarded, but deep down, he knows it is not coldness. It is clarity. She sees through him, past the layers he's built to impress, seduce, or distract. Her gaze does not flatter. It penetrates, it disarms, and that is where desire turns into worship. Because what a man ultimately desires in the woman he cannot own is not her submission. It's her recognition, and yet, she offers none, not out of cruelty, but from sacred discernment. She has evolved past the need to soothe fragile egos. She no longer confuses validation with love. She does not explain her distance, nor justify her silence. She simply is, like the moon, present, glowing, untouched by the tides it commands. And this mystifies him, because every trick he knows, every charm, every tactic, every subtle manipulation, fails in her presence. She does not melt for empty words. She does not shift her center to accommodate his chaos. And when he pulls away to test her loyalty, she lets him, without a word, without a wound, without the hunger to chase. That is the spiritual strike. Not the leaving, but the letting go. The kind that can only come from a woman who has stared into abandonment and chosen to love herself through it. Who has sat with her own shadows long enough to know that no man, no matter how magnetic, is worth betraying her center. She does not fear being alone, because she has walked that desert already, barefoot. weeping, bleeding, and divine, and on the other side, she met a version of herself that was not desperate to be loved, but desperate to be free. Freedom is her oxygen now, and men can feel it. The grounded ones revere it, the wounded ones resent it, but none can ignore it. And so he desires her, not in the usual way. This isn't lust, this isn't obsession, this is something deeper, something existential. Her existence unsettles the architecture of his psyche. She embodies the opposite of every story he's been told. That love must be earned through performance. That women need to be needed. That silence is weakness. That availability equals worth. She disproves it all. And so, she becomes a memory he can't resolve, a sensation he can't name. He returns to her energy the way a pilgrim returns to a sacred site, not to conquer, but to remember something forgotten within himself. Because somewhere deep inside, he knows, this woman wasn't here to complete him. She was here to unmask him. And what do you do with a woman like that? A woman who doesn't need you, but sees you. A woman who doesn't flinch when you disappear. A woman who is whole, with or without your attention. You don't have her, you become worthy of her. And if you can't, you carry her ghost. He may never say it aloud. He may never tell his friends. Never write it in a journal. Never speak it into the echo of his room at night. But there it is, the ache. The low, lingering pulse of her. The woman he could not grasp. Not because she was elusive, but because she was anchored. And his hands were made for reaching, not receiving, for taking, not holding. This is the cruel paradox of the masculine psyche in its immature state. It craves what it has not yet earned. It desires the depth that it has not yet prepared to enter. And when confronted with a woman who is that depth, who does not collapse into his chaos or perform to gain his favor? He calls her difficult, too much, detached. But these are the words of a boy rattled by the presence of a queen. Because she does not mirror back his ideal self. She reflects his unlived potential, his shadows, his emotional gaps, his wounded masculine. And that's where desire shifts from sexual to spiritual. She becomes not just a woman, she becomes a rite of passage. She is the fire. He can warm himself by it or be burned. And for many men, that fire is too honest, too searing, because it forces them to confront the roles they've mistaken for identity, the role of the pursuer, the provider, the protector. She requires none of these. Not because she doesn't honor them, but because she doesn't depend on them. She is the protector of her own peace, the provider of her own joy, the pursuer of her own truth. And so, he stands outside her temple, not knowing how to enter. Because the doors are not opened by charm, effort, or conquest. They open only when the man meets himself. Not the curated version, but the raw, wounded, unseen parts. The boy who needed to be needed. The adolescent who equated love with validation. The man who thought control was intimacy. She waits for no one. But she calls him inward, not with words, but with the echo of what she does not give. You, the woman who has felt this, know how lonely that power can be. To hold space for depth in a world addicted to surface. To be the mirror men both crave and curse. To be the storm that wakes them up and the silence that undoes their illusions. You know what it is to be misunderstood, mislabeled, even abandoned, not because you were lacking, but because you were too much truth for a man still clinging to lies. But here's the secret you must never forget. Your value was never in your ability to be kept. It was in your capacity to remain untamed. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And that is what you are to him, the unconscious made visible. The desire he cannot explain, the ache he cannot soothe, the feminine that does not need to scream, because she radiates. He may try to replace you. Not once, not twice, many times. He will look for your softness in other women's bodies. He will seek your fire in shallow games and whispered distractions. But he will not find it. Because it was never just you. It was who you became when you stepped fully into yourself. When you claimed your silence as strength, your solitude as sacred, your desire as divine. He desires the woman he cannot own because she is the only one who demands he own himself. And so, she becomes not just a memory. She becomes a myth, not one told in stories, but one etched into the muscle of his becoming. The ghost of her love becomes the threshold he crosses again and again in dreams. In regrets. In quiet moments when the noise dies down and the soul speaks up. The woman he could not own becomes the lesson he could not escape. What he doesn't understand, not fully, not consciously, is that his desire for her was never just about her. It was about the version of himself that rose in her presence. The man he almost became. The man she silently demanded. Not with ultimatums, but with unwavering standards, with her posture, her gaze, her silence, her refusal to settle for anything less than truth. She did not need to instruct him. She did not need to ask him to grow. Her very being evoked growth. And that is the most terrifying kind of woman, not the one who begs to be loved, but the one who stands so fully in her own wholeness that a man must rise just to stand beside her, or else fall away. He desires her because she touched the divine in him, not through flattery, but through contrast, through showing him who he was not yet, through revealing the hollowness of performance and the agony of real potential unclaimed. He will remember her not just for how she felt, but for who he almost was when she was near. And this is the essence of sacred feminine power, the ability to awaken without seducing, to inspire without surrendering sovereignty. She becomes the psychic threshold a man cannot cross until he dismantles the false idols of his ego, his control, his pride, his idea of love built on conditions. Because to truly be with her, he would have to descend into himself. He would have to face his wounds, his unfinished boyhood, his unwept grief, the mother he still seeks in every woman, the shame he masks with desire, the loneliness he confuses for longing. She would not save him from that. She would not soften the path. She is not the mother, not the muse, not the fantasy. She is the feminine that says, "Meet me when you've met yourself." And that is what makes her unforgettable. Because she is not what a man wants. She is what his soul remembers. To the woman listening, you may feel like you've been punished for your power, that your depth makes you difficult, your independence intimidating, that your sacred boundaries have cost you connection. But know this, you were not left. You were released from the ones who could not meet you. Your silence was not a loss. It was a test, and those who failed were never meant to hold you. He may think he chose to walk away, but you chose long before, to stop lowering yourself into relationships that ask you to shrink. You chose to love without abandoning yourself. And that choice rewrites every pattern, every inherited trauma, every story that says a woman must earn love by dimming her flame. Carl Jung taught that the integration of opposites is the path to wholeness. You are the living embodiment of that integration, soft and unyielding, open yet discerning, loving, but never desperate. Your presence demands that a man integrate himself before he can touch you. This is not cruelty, this is initiation, and in time, some will rise, they will return, change, or not at all. Either way, your work is the same, to remain devoted to the woman within, to the voice that whispers. You do not need to be owned to be desired. You do not need to be chosen to be powerful. You already are. And as for him, he will think of you, not once, but in every moment he feels his hollowness. In every woman he tries to love without knowing himself. In every quiet night when his distractions fall silent, he will remember her, the woman he could not own, because she belonged to the truth. And now, the final part. There is a moment, far beyond the heat of initial desire, when a man realizes that not all women are meant to be held. Some are meant to hold him accountable to the man he's never dared to become. And she, the one he could not own, was never a lover in the way the world defines it. She was a soul mirror, a psychological crucible, the sacred storm that arrived not to comfort, but to crack him open. She was not his, not because she was unavailable, but because she was unalterable. Because her energy was never shaped to fit his needs. It stood on its own, ancient, rooted, whole. She didn't demand respect, she embodied it, and so, he desired her, not in a fleeting, flesh-bound way, but in the way a starving man craves what will actually nourish him. But nourishment requires change, and that's the ache he could not name. To be in her presence meant to grow or go, to rise or retreat, because she would not become less just to make him feel like more. She would not lower her voice to make his ego louder. She would not abandon herself to hold him together. She had already done that, in another life, in younger years, before she learned the cost. No, the woman he could not own was the one who had already owned herself. Who had walked through loneliness, sat with shame, and bled in silence until she realized, no man, no matter how magnetic, is worth abandoning your center for. So she stayed with herself, again and again, and men felt it. They still do. They feel it in the steadiness of her gaze, not flirty, not hungry, just present. They feel it in the way she listens, not to respond, but to witness. They feel it in her goodbye, clean, uncluttered, free of the debris of drama. They feel it in her absence, like a cathedral once visited, now haunting their memory. He remembers not what she gave, But what she withheld, her need for him. He remembers not her words, but her stillness in the face of his chaos. He remembers not her love, but her self-love, the untouchable force that made him want to be better, even if he didn't know how. And now, he stands in the shadow of who she was, not haunted, but humbled, not broken, but branded. Because some women don't leave wounds, they leave standards. And when a woman becomes a standard, she is no longer just a chapter in a man's story. She becomes the mirror he must pass through to write the next one. To you, the woman listening, hear this. You do not need to be explained. You do not need to be softer for a man to feel strong. You do not need to dim to be loved. The man who is worthy of your fire will not fear its heat. He will learn how to burn alongside you without turning you to ash. And until then, let your silence speak. Let your space be sacred. Let your energy remain untamed. Because the truth is, the man who desires you, yet cannot own you, is a man being reborn. Not because you saved him, but because you reminded him that salvation was never yours to give. It was his to earn. And as he walks the long, lonely road back to himself, your memory will remain, not as a fantasy, but as a threshold, as the feminine mystery that refused to collapse for love, and in doing so, became unforgettable. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses.